In this video, I'm going to show you what one of my consultation sessions look like. In particular, this consultation session is more about equipment and what equipment to buy, and it's a gear and advice consultation. So I wanted to shoot this video and show you exactly what we're kind of talking about in these sessions, just so you can so people can get an idea of how beneficial it can be. Now, the reason these sorts of sessions are beneficial for people is what I do is I charge £100 and we can talk about anything you want. It can be gear advice, it could be how to build a studio, mixing advice, mastering advice, anything you want. It could be how to route your studio in a really efficient way, how to set up an Avid S4 console, and these sorts of sessions are massively beneficial for people. And the gear and advice sessions are really advantageous for people, because the reason being is what I do is I charge £100 for an hour's session. And within that session, you're asking whatever you want to ask, and we can go over specific things such as gear and advice. And that is a small price to pay to know 100% you're getting the right gear for you. Now, the problem a lot of people have, and this is what all the clients that I have and I speak to, and it's partly why I set up the YouTube channel to kind of be able to show people what equipment sounds like before they go and buy it, is a lot of people, they don't understand what gear to buy and what gear will work for them best. Now, personally myself, I've used everything. I know what everything sounds like. I can recommend stuff based on exactly what you need. So when it comes to these sorts of gear and advice consultations, I can work out with you exactly what piece of equipment you should buy, and what is best for your workflow and what is best for you. Ultimately, you buy the right equipment, because what happens a lot of the time, and I'm sure most of you will have experienced this, you'll buy something and it's not quite for you. Now, what you can either do is you can maybe send that back, or you're stuck with it and you have to sell it on and then swap it for something else later down the line. Now, what this service does is it eliminates all that. So you know you're buying the right gear for you, what works for you. So let's jump into the video and you can see just how beneficial the client who I'm talking to finds the session.
I've learned a lot along the way. And you've been an excellent resource. I think one of the best resources out there to actually hear what things do in the mastering chain. And that's been massive. I've spent good money trying to figure out what I want to do with my vocal chain. But basically, like the goal, so I'm actually down the line, I'd like to do things for other people as well, but primarily like just myself as an artist. And I know they say you shouldn't mix and master your music, but there's a level of quality I'd like to be able to get to myself first. And so
you're kind of looking at buying the right gear for you, what's not going to break the bank, and generally just get, rather than spending money to find out later on that it's not right for you, then having to sell it and then trying to find what it is that's right for your workflow. You're just kind of in the process of wanting to buy what's needed, what's not needed, and work out exactly what to get.
Exactly. Like, for instance, I thought just an upgrade with an audio interface and maybe like a $1,000 microphone would be good for me, but it's much bigger than that. Once I got that, then recording hot into the box is dealing with the peaks. It's like, what is it? I just spent all this money. Now there's new problems. So, it's been good. It's been a good journey. And sales reps are helpful.
I'll tell you the one thing with sales reps.
But
The one thing with sales reps is they'll sell you what's on the shelf.
Exactly.
They won't sell you what you need. They'll sell you what they want you to buy. That's the problem with sales reps.
and it's really the luck of the draw to the extent that they'll point you in a direction and say, this is what I think maybe you need. But if you say, yeah, I'm really interested in this, they're gonna sell that to you.
Cool.
So I've learned the hard way a little bit, and have some things that I need to sell, but for the most part, happy with the vocal side of things. You know, when I wanted to embark on getting into the analog world for a mastering chain, mix bus and like light mastering chain, um, had to invest a little bit into my room. So I have some sound panels, but I'm also in an apartment. And so the sound that I have it's, not state of the art by any means, but invested in a good pair of headphones so I could go back and forth and hear, okay, that's my room, and then here's actually what it should be closer. Um, I don't know how you feel about headphone mixing in general.
I'm not a fan. Headphone mixing, I'm not a fan of. Only because I tell you, there's a few reasons why, but the main one for me is if I wear headphones for a long period of time, my ears know about it. My ears ache the day after. I get this kind of numbness in my ears, and that's one reason I hate mixing on headphones. And you know, I don't get that with speakers. And obviously, in a situation where you're in an apartment, you can't kind of really crank the speakers up loud at night as well as kind of during the day, I guess, as well. So the thing with headphones is having a decent pair of headphones, but there's no reason you can't mix on headphones and work on headphones for a period of time and then move over to the monitors, even just for referencing and making the final adjustments, final changes, because there's certain things you just can't assess in headphones as easily as you can with a good pair of monitors and an accurate room. The one thing I can always tell is when someone sends me a track for mastering. You can always tell whether they've mixed it in headphones because it will lack so much bass. The bass will literally bass won't there just won't be enough bass in the track, and that's a common thing that happens when mixing with headphones. Highs and everything perfectly fine, all nice, but when it comes to the low end, um, there's a lot of lacking in the low end on headphone mixes. I find a lot.
Yeah, so you know, uh, from there, I think I had a pair of Yamaha HS5s. Definitely, uh, not a great pair of monitors. I think my dad had some JBLs, from 10 years ago that I first used that I remember being significantly better, especially in the low end. So invested in a better pair of monitors. Still not like top notch, but I'd say from what I could gather on the internet and talking to people is maybe one of the best entry level mastering grade monitors.
What did
So
you go
I
for?
have some barefoots. Um, I forget if it's the three-way sideways one, not the vertical one. I heard vertical ones maybe have some issues here and there and it's hit or miss, but and then have some isoacoustic um stands to stop vibrations or whatever it is.
What
But so that's the extent of the acoustic treatment that I have. Not ideal, but I think it was a pill to swallow in the first place that you had to invest into your interface, into some level of treatment
before
to
you
get
go down
better
the route of the
monitoring.
fancy stuff? You've
Exactly.
got to get. I always say this one thing is you're only as good as the weakest link in your chain. So you could have the best compressor, the best EQ running through a Focusrite 2i2, and the compressor and EQ are rubbish.
Yeah.
Where get a good interface, good compressor, good EQ, everything throughout the chain has to be equally as good.
Yeah. And Since then, I think the first thing I began with the Burl ADC for printing,
Really?
and then the Neve MBT. So that's what I began with. But the thing is that the signal is usually pretty low in Pro Tools when I'm going in there. So I'm adding a lot of gain. That's what I'm trying to accomplish, and I want to color the sound. I want it to, maybe not be the most clean and polished sound, but I want a good balance, good separation, um, and everything to be relatively clear. And you know, the MBT was cool, but definitely didn't offer the flexibility that I really needed. So, watching your videos, I stumbled upon the grandchild. I think I was definitely hesitant I wasn't really interested in the West Audio stuff at all at first, and I wanted to stick with the more vintage tone, and it was cool, but it just lacks the flexibility that I need for a two bus. Versus something like the West Audio Pandora now, and the Hyperion, which is now the beginning of the chain, is, I mean, the plugin is amazing. So anyone that's really used to plugins, you don't even have to worry
Look,
about the knobs.
there's a reason I talk so highly about West Audio, and it's because, and it's the reason I'm surrounded by West Audio gear. It is quality stuff. You cannot go wrong. I have not got a unit that I've got from West Audio and gone, yeah, that's not really for me. Everything I've used, everything I've bought through West Audio is incredible. And yeah, I mean, plugins, the ability to automate, the ability to recall everything. It can't they just cannot be beaten right now. There's no one. I don't think there's anyone in the audio industry creating gear that's anywhere close to them right now. I think there'll be people who'll try and compete with them in this realm within the next 2-3 years, but at the moment they've kind of just coined the industry in that realm is theirs right now. They can't be beaten at it.
Yeah, and when I started with the MBT too, realized quickly working on different songs that pretty quickly it's going to be difficult to remember all my settings when you dial it in. So didn't realize how big of a factor recallability is, and it's been
Well,
great. So
in here, I've got 180 channels, all digitally
yeah,
recallable. Now
yeah,
you imagine if I had to recall all of that by hand. It'd take me an hour to recall everything. I've got literally a console, 32 channel console, some in it as well that's digitally recallable. Everything's digitally recallable. For me, it's been the best move I've made in a long time, in terms of taking me to a kind of a a, a kind of moving me to a studio setup that I would truly call game changing, because this actually genuinely has changed the game for me. Like, everything's recallable, patch bay, every EQ, every compressor, the summing mixer, uh, the control surface behind me, that's all digital control. Um, every single piece of my processing chain is recallable. And I mean, look, I've it's something I've dreamed about for many, many, many years, and it's a reality now. It's the future. It's not even the future. It's the present. It's right now that we're able to do this. And I think, honestly, I mean, in the next 5 years, I think everything will end up going this way, because it's so much better than, like, I've had studios that are full of non-digitally recallable gear. I've got a studio down the hall there that's non-digitally recallable, and I love it. I love all the gear that's in it, but this is next level. I went into there, was working in there yesterday, and Nick had to recall something, and he sat there. He's like, "I just got to recall this," and he sat there recalling it, and I just looked at him. I went, this just seems so medieval what you're doing now. Doing this hand of recalling things via a picture. It's like in here, I've just literally opened a session. It's done.
Oh, the question for me at that point, I mean, you've seen the best of analog, you've seen the best of now what we have, this modern analog. So vintage analog versus modern analog. Do you think there's anything lost in, a certain tone um, of compression or some special sauce in the EQ in
So there's nothing tonally that's lost. I wouldn't say that anything like tonally we haven't lost anything. The one thing that we don't currently have in the digital recall realm is this large range of stuff that we can choose from. When it comes to EQs in the digital recall realm, we're talking about the West Audio Tube EQ or the Better Maker Mastering EQ. Next month we'll have the Black Box HGQ, but that's it. So you've got 3 to choose from as of next month, whereas at the moment you've got 2 to choose from. This is the only difference, is that you have such a range of gear to choose from when it's non-digitally recallable, compared to having 2 or 3 units to choose from, and that's something that will change over time. And you'll have a lot more brands that will have digitally recallable gear. But I mean, as well, is at the same time, is right now you've got a really lovely EQ and a really nice clean EQ. They're your options in digital recall, or you've got the 500 series. But that's I don't feel that there's you're lacking anything in the way of color or sound when it comes to digital recall. It's not, you're not looking at it going, right, well, I'm going to get a lesser sound, but I'm going to get recall. You're not getting a lesser sound. I actually personally think that you're getting a better sound. It's a more modern sound. It's a more precise sound. And it's a fact that you can do so much more with the digitally recallable gear. You can switch to mid-side for one. You've got solo bands on the EQs, things like that. You've got so much options, so many options that just come as standard with digitally recallable gear. Like if we compare, for instance, like a Masalek ML8. No, I tell you what. Compare a Manley Massive Passive. Now you get a Manley Massive Passive, and it's just a good sounding EQ. It doesn't have anything like, it's not got mid side. It's not. It's dual mono, but you don't have things like stereo link, parameter link. You can switch on the tube EQ. You can switch between a clean output or a nice saturated kind of coloured output. You've got things like solo in bands. You've got 0.8 dB steps, whereas when you buy a Massive Passive, you either get the mastering edition or you get the mixing edition. One I think is plus 10 dB and the other one's plus minus 20 dB. So you buy the version that you want. Whereas the West Audio Tube EQ, you just go, right, what do I want to use it in? Plus 15 or plus 5? In plus 5, you get 0.08 dB steps, which is ridiculous. That is so fine that you could do literally anything on it. You've got all the additional things of a plug-in recall. You can automate it with the plugin. You got proportional Q as well with it. So it's like you get so much more with these digitally recallable pieces of gear that when you put them side by side, they're both equally as good. They're both great sounding EQs, but you just get so much more in terms of functionality with the digitally recallable gear. And the only thing that is a downside to digitally recallable gear at the moment is in 2025 there's not currently enough of it to choose from. That's the only downside. And it's just non-digitally recallable gear's been around for donkey's years. So you can buy vintage, you can buy relatively newer stuff, you can buy anything. There's so much to choose from. You probably, if you went looking for an EQ that was non-digitally recallable, you've probably got 50 to choose from, and they'll all sound great. But in the digital recall realm, you've got maybe 2 to choose from. So that's the only thing at the moment, I find, but that will change.
But there's no flavors that you really miss in the,
No.
like, I think of particular things like maybe the Mog high airband. I think of maybe like the special polish that Shadow Hills would have.
Yeah,
Those sorts of things.
them sorts of things like transformers and things like that. There's certain things. You, all these different pieces of gear, even the digitally recallable pieces of gear, they've all got their own sound. So if you want to go and get that sound, if you want API sound, if you're looking at consoles, for instance, and you want the API sound of a console, you don't go buy an SSL. You buy an API because that's the API sound. You want Neve summing, you go and get Neve because you get that output transformer, silk textures and all that sort of stuff. So you buy it for that specific thing. If you want the kind of a sound of the Shadow Hills, you go buy a Shadow Hills. But if you want the sound of the digitally recallable gear, then buy the digitally recallable gear. And it does have a sound, and each piece of gear has its own kind of unique sound, and its own unique functions, and they all sound different. That's why no mastering engineer, it's like no one has all the same gear and all the same chain, and that way we all sound different and we all have our unique sound. But I'll tell you, from my own experience, having all of the gear that I could ever want, and just like literally, money's no object. Buy whatever you want for your mastering chain. Buy it all. I had a lovely chain, and I really liked it. But I can compare the masters that I'd previously done on that mastering chain with my choice mastering gear that I chose, and I wanted this, and this for specific purposes. Compared to this mastering chain, it's night and day. This mastering chain is so much superior, and it's not. The thing with it is it's a case of this gear is so it's very modern sounding, so it has quite a modern sound to it, but it can arc back to a more vintage sound. You can get tube warmth. You've got the Verimu tube comp. That sounds brilliant. That's comparable to a Fairchild in many ways. It's not a Fairchild, but it's comparable to it, and they do sound relatively similar. And one's here and now with all the features you could ever want on it, and if it ever broke, could always be fixed. Whereas a Fairchild, you've got little to no chance of getting valves and things like that for the old one. Whereas these ones now, you're talking £4,000 for the tube comp, or 36 grand for the Fairchild. But the big difference there is, from a marketing perspective, is one's a West Audio tube comp, the other one's a Fairchild. And from a marketing perspective, the Fairchild's what's going to really bring the clients.
Yeah. So I think I think that's good. Like I have tried now the Hyperion. I mean, this is just 500 series digital recallable stuff.
So with the Hyperion, for instance, do you find that just really nice and clean and lovely?
So far, and I don't know if it's just the demo, but I feel like it's introducing some hiss. Is the one thing, but I mean, aside from that, it was immediately night and day. Having the flexibility to do mid side in that way, where I can push it maybe a little more than a plug-in. Man, yeah, fantastic. The results I've been able to get from that.
And the other thing with it is because it's digitally recallable. What you can do is, if you've only got one, you can put it onto a track, dial in the settings you want, record through it, commit to it, print that in, leave that track active, just make the plugin inactive, drag it down onto another track, process another track, turn that inactive. Then if you need to go back to that track and make an edit, you can activate it again. It'll all reset back to that one, and then you could just jump around and you can commit to and print the audio for each track. So you can, I mean, it's a long way of doing things. I wouldn't personally like to have to do that. That's why I've got so many of them. But that's always a possibility with digitally recallable gear.
It's also got the A/B too, so I can try something else, dial in something else, and then go back and forth.
A good tip for that is what I do a lot with is I get the setting, I set everything up how I like it on A. I then copy that onto B. I then make some slight changes. Maybe I want to do this. Maybe I want to add some THD or something like that. And then I switch between A to B. And then I can decide if those little changes that I've made are better or if they're not as good. And you can just switch between them. That's always nice to do.
And definitely something you can't do with with vintage
No.
stuff. So I mean that's amazing because you run into analysis paralysis, and while you have so many options, it's also extremely straightforward to see the differences in those changes.
Yeah.
So pretty pleased so far with that. And the Pandora, oftentimes I'll be mixing, a consolidated print for a beat or something like that with vocals and effects and everything. And I think a lot of people do that. They're doing 2-track mixing unless you're, really serious. And sometimes I work with the stems with some producers, but for the most part, I'm okay with the mix that they have. I'm not going to work with a producer that I don't think the mix is particularly good. So, but there's sometimes level issues with the low end. I think some of the producers really like to try to push it, and just this Pandora having that low band.
Yeah.
And also a sidechain filter in the low band too, so you're really not even making that overkill.
One thing I like about the Pandora is that you've got the THD per band rather than just over the whole thing. So you can select that high band, for instance, and you can put that on high THD. You can get this really crispy tops if you control it right. And same with the low band, you can put that into mid, get some more beef out of the lows, and you're not just affecting the whole lot. You're just doing that low band. I think that's a really good feature. And then you've obviously got the mix where you can blend in.
It's been great, and I mean, I'll dial in my settings and then add a little bit of THD, and I've been impressed with the THD so far. So, it just adds something that I don't know how I would get it otherwise.
Of all the West Audio units, the THD that is the best is on the NG leveler, which is the leveler for your summing mixer, and that's incredible. The THD on that is incredible, and it's I find it's far better than the THD on the 500 series and better on better than the 19-inch. It's something they've done with the NG leveler. Brilliant. How it can use the THD.
Oh, I don't think I'm familiar with that. You said
so the NG leveler, the way that works is really interesting. Is if you've got say you've got a summing mixer and you don't have control. Like for instance, I've got the Rupert Neve 5056, is it? 5059 satellite, 16 channels, summing mixer, Rupert Neve. What you don't have with that, obviously that's not digitally recallable. So all the gains that are on there, you don't have digital recall control over. So what you do is you set them all to nominal gains. So they're basically passing through, no change in sound. What you then do is you go from your output, so your converter, you go into the NG leveler, then into the back of the summing mixer. Now what you have are faders in the box that are digitally recallable. that can control the level that's going into the summing mixer. So you then have these gain pots that are on the summing mixer are replaced by actual level faders that are in the NG leveler that can then adjust the input into the summing mixer. So it turns your summing mixer into a digitally recallable summing mixer. It's
It's
brilliant.
yeah, that's insane actually, and you're able to hit some THD going into
Into the
the
summing
summit.
mixer.
That's that's
So say you've got
something.
one of your summing channels is your drum bus, you can then apply THD to the drum bus, and yeah. The other good thing about it is you can run automation. So you've then got automation control over the faders on all your buses that are going into the summing mixer. It's brilliant.
Yeah, that's some really next level modern stuff right
Yeah,
there, and you have the flexibility too. I mean, because the satellite has the blue and the red silk, right?
yeah.
So that's awesome.
Stick it to red, leave it on red. Red's sweet. Especially if you've got all these different THD settings before it, you can get all that warm thickness out the low end before you hit it. So then when you're in the summing mixer, silk red, bang! It's a sweet sound that comes out of that. I tried the other day. I tried a mix without the summing mixer, just an experimental thing, and the difference was it was it just really didn't sound as good. It was a night and day difference because I was considering I was thinking maybe do I need analog summing? Um, Digital summing's good these days, and I did just basically a direct comparison between the two, and it was like wow, the difference between them is massive.
And I know there's a big debate on YouTube about that, between digital and analog summing, and it's a question that I have. It's not something I currently own, but
Is analog summing should be it's the least of your worries, right? There's so much more to think about getting right and getting good. Analog summing can be done in a box. It was the last thing. Literally, I'll tell you why I got analog summing. I got to the point in this studio, I was like, right, I've got everything. I can't buy any more. What can I buy? I mean, it's a lovely situation to be in. And it was like, oh, well, you don't have analog summing. Cool, let's put some analog summing in as well. That's the only reason I went down that route because I was very much I was on the side of digital summing, perfectly fine. But now I've put. I used to have an SSL console, and I didn't feel that there was that much difference in terms of summing in the box and summing on the SSL. I didn't feel there was that much difference, but summing on the Neve compared to summing in the box is a huge difference. But like I say, is last thing you do is summing.
so you wouldn't recommend. So just continue walking through the chain. Yeah, Hyperion, Pandora, Swiss Army knives can tackle any problem. I feel pretty good about that. And then I go into. I know you've commented that you're not a big fan of the SBL big, but I've been. It just adds life to my mix. Sometimes I mean, it can get disgusting very fast, so I keep it
Yeah.
really low, and then this little bass switch is nice. And then from there, go into the Carnaby HE2, which in mid side, I when I first got it, I was using it in stereo, and I was like, oh, this is cool, but I felt I was overdoing it, and honestly, maybe ruining the mixes a bit. And then I pushed it into mid side, and I was just, yeah,
Especially
it's
see
man.
you have that after your SSL big. So what your
Mhm.
big's doing is your big's giving you a bit of a wider signal, and then what the HE2 will do is it will add that harmonic brilliance into the sides. That's what
Exactly,
it's brilliant for.
and so where do I go next from there? And I know I sent over like a long list of stuff, and I think about summing still if because I'm pretty happy with what I'm getting now. I'll print through push it through the burl, and then um, do some super light processing in the box, and then push the limiter.
Here's the thing. Summing's good. Summing. If you got like a 5059, for instance, you'd need an extra 16 channels of D to A as well. So you're paying 3,600 pounds, which is like 4,000, I guess about $4,200 for a Neve summing mixer. Then you've got to get conversion as well. So let's say another, I don't know, 2,000, 1,500. So you're talking like probably $6,000, let's say, to add summing. And the difference that you'll hear, it's not huge. It's not a massive, huge difference. For me, it is, and it's difficult for me not to recommend it, but to highly recommend it, if that makes sense. I highly recommend analog summing. It's brilliant, and I know I get such a much better sound out of it when summing analog. But if there was £6,000 to be spent, you could better spend that somewhere else. I'd say if you got to the end of your chain and you was like, right, I've bought all the gear that I want, now what can I buy? Then look at summing. And that's exactly what I did. I bought all the gear that I wanted. I had everything that I wanted. There's nothing wrong with digital summing. That analog summing does just give you that little bit more. But it depends as well. With summing is like, you could buy an SSL Sigma, for instance, and some using SSL summing, and it's not as impressive. I don't find it's like you switch from analog summing to digital summing. You compare them and you go, with an SSL, you go, yeah, I can hear a little bit of difference, but it's nothing major. Whereas with the Rupert Neve, I can hear a very definitive difference there, and that's more because of the output transformer and the Silk Red and Silk Blue. But if I had your chain where you're talking about having a Hyperion, a Pandora, Big, a HE2, the one thing I would say you're kind of lacking there is sort of a mastering compressor. So you'll be using your Pandora as your compressor, but that's still more like a VCA comp. It is a VCA. I see that Pandora is very much free of the diones as free bands. And there's no real, like, you would massively benefit in that chain from adding something like a West Audio Rear, which is a very new comp. That will fit really nicely with those other pieces of gear that you've got there. That's going to give you a really nice compressor for your mastering chain, and it works in a different way than it would to a Verimue works in a very different way than it does to a VCA comp. So it's a lot more controlled, it's a lot more smooth, and you'll use it in a different way. And that's one thing I would recommend you do, just on the basis that you've got a Hyperion, you've got a Pandora, and a Rear would just go really nice with that chain altogether.
Yeah, I think my intuition has led me to, based on what I hear from industry records and where my mixes are currently at, I just feel like that's what I'm missing. Like, so it's final polish compression. Like, I've got the levels right, I've got the EQ right, I've got the stereo signal in a good spot. Curious if you would, though, use the mastering compressor directly after the Pandora, or if you would do so after you've widened the signal, saturated the signal, and at the very end, final polish.
All the way down the chain, yeah.
All the way down the chain. Okay, that's what I was picturing as well.
And,
like, I think that makes a lot of sense.
The other thing that you could get is a limiter.
Okay.
But in all honesty, I would say, unless you're going to go and get yourself a Hum Audio Low, which is the king of limiters, I'd say stay in the box.
Yeah.
And look, you're paying like $9,000 for one of them.
Yeah. I think I would invest first into, really stepping up the acoustic treatment and potentially upgrading the barefoots. Although I'm pretty happy with the barefoots, but I know.
Barefoots are great.
Yeah.
Those barefoots that you've got are great. There's nothing wrong with them. I'd say, what interface are you using?
The Fireface RME Fireface 802 FS.
They're great as well. Great converters in RME. Yeah. So it's not
Nice.
like, yeah. A lot of the time, I'll speak to people and they'll be like, oh yeah, I've got these really nice monitors, and I'll say, right, okay, what interface or what converters are you using? Oh, UAD Apollo. It was like, well, change those converters and you literally do an upgrade on your speakers. Like it's night and day difference. You switch from an Apollo to a really good converters. But yeah, RME converters are great. Nothing wrong with them.
And the D to A, because I have the ADC for the purposes of printing, hitting the transformer, but the D to A from all the research I've done, what I can tell is really just true, accurate listening.
Right.
I
So
guess
so you've got the Burl A to D.
I've got the A to D, not the D to A. Yeah.
Right. That's the one you want.
Yeah.
Because that's got the sound. So the Burl that has a beautiful sound to it. Now when I do my mastering chain, I use my Lynx converters coming out. So I go Lynx converter out, and then I come back. I go through the chain, and I come back in through my Burl A to D. I've got the D to A Burl as well, but what I find with the Lynx are a lot cleaner and a bit more transparent, and what goes in kind of comes out, and they sound great. They've got this really nice sparkle to them. I find when I'm going from D to A, I want to be as clean as possible, and the Burls have quite a coloured sound. Coming back,
Because it's not actually impacting the signal, right? Like it's impacting the signal to the extent it affects your decisions in what you hear, right?
yeah,
Is that understanding right?
yeah. So I mean, but the Burl going from A to D, that's got all the lovely juice in it. That's got the transformers. That's got the sound. So that's one you want to keep because that sounds amazing. I would say, yeah, use your RME going from D to A, and use your Burl going from A to D. That's a perfect combination. The RME converters are somewhat comparable to the Lynx converters as well.
Um yeah, so I mean that I feel good about that. And um question would be you posted a video recently about the Trinov. I, would you say that they serve different purposes? The a good dedicated ADC and the Trinov. I mean, it sounds like they do somewhat similar things, but Trinov being completely focused on room correction and getting the room right.
What, using that as an interface as well? Because the Nova.
Yeah, sorry. I think just kind of a bad question there. But I am curious about the Trinov though, and my especially in a room like this in an apartment, which I am looking to move here shortly, and we'll have a dedicated room. So finally, for the first time in my life, I can have a dedicated space to do this stuff, and really excited. So I'll have to buy a desk. I'll have to um, look more seriously into what I do to the room.
So
But
what I'd say in
curious about how you'd approach that. Yeah.
what I'd say in regards to the Trinov isn't a magic box. Well, it is, but it's not this magic box that's going to turn a bad room into a good room. The room's got to be relatively good for it to then turn that room. It's more a case of good room turns into an amazing room. A bad room still sounds bad even with a Trinov on. So, I mean, even your room, just the fact that you've got some acoustic panels, it's going to make a good difference for you. I know myself, I was highly reluctant to fit a Trinov because it was going to cost me. I think mine cost me around 12 to 14,000 pound, and to spend that sort of money on room correction, it's like, I could have an unfair child compressor for the same amount of money, and it's like that's a lot more appealing than room correction. But it was only once I put it in and I demoed it and tried it out and I hooked my system up to it and I basically went bypass. Oh my God. And my room sounded great before. My room sounds great, but with the Trinov on, it sounds incredible. And it's as well as the big thing for me is I know I can trust what I'm hearing. And you cannot put a price on having full trust in what you're hearing. Now, if you take something like SonarWorks, for instance, I can't trust anything I hear coming out. So I don't know whether it's better or whether it's worse, because it's not a great room corrector in comparison to Trinov. Trinov is just exceptional. So Trinov is generally expensive. I think the Nova's like £4,000 for 2 channel, but it is incredibly good and it will make a massive difference. How much of a difference depends on the room, but what it is doing for you is it's giving you reassurance that what you're hearing is accurate and correct to what you should be hearing in that room.
So, um, I guess we've hit on a lot of different things. Would you say that is first and foremost, in my situation, obviously like acoustics, like a lot of people recommend, yeah,
I
figure
would
your
say,
acoustics out first, but
yeah.
I sort of have it addressed and I'm sort of lacking, final, I feel, polish, compression.
Here's
You know,
here's something that I put to a few people when we talk about this sort of subject is how good do you think your mixes would be if you put two kind of cotton wool buds in your ears and then tried to mix?
not so good.
It's the same as if you were to mix in an inaccurate room. It's very much the same principle. Is that if you can hear 100% what is coming out of those speakers, if you can hear 100% accurately what that actually sounds like, then you'll make all the best mixing decisions, and it doesn't matter what gear you have. You will make the right decisions based on the fact that you can hear perfectly. And then the difference being, even if you was in this perfect room and then you put these cotton wool buds in your ears, you can't make all the right decisions because you can't hear perfectly. It's the most important thing is getting the audio from those speakers to your ears perfectly. And when you do that, and I know this from my own experience, when you get that perfect sound, mixing's easier, mastering's easier, everything becomes easier because you're able to hear. It's like I guess, I don't know, trying to, if you were a painter, I don't know what's a good analogy for this. If you was a painter and you were trying to paint something, but you had impaired vision, you're not going to be able to paint as well as someone with perfect vision. Even if you have the same amount of ability, you just physically can't see the same things. So it's the same with audio.
That would be a pretty funny A to B. You actually did
Yeah,
that and put the the swabs in your ears and said, "This is the result I get with them."
yeah.
You know,
Well, what I've done a video. I've done a video, and maybe I'll do an updated video on this, where I did a master with the Trinov on and with the Trinov off, and then compared them.
I gotta look at that.
Yeah, it's a really old video that I've done, and I'll do an updated one because it's a really interesting video, and the difference is massive. And the only difference is that I'm hearing perfect audio come into my ears, and then not so perfect audio when the Trinov's off. and the difference of the decisions that I make, because I'm physically trying to get, my ears are telling me that the frequency balance should be this. So if I'm hearing from the speakers, let's say not enough highs, I'm now balancing it like this. So I've now printed it with more high frequencies to adjust for the imperfections of my room and speakers, and that makes a massive difference. And that's the importance of Trinov. It's huge. And like I say, it's that reassurance that what you're actually hearing is perfect. And if you're reassured about that, you can then go and do your job mixing, with that reassurance that you know what I'm hearing is perfect and what I'm hearing is correct. So you can make all those right decisions.
So I think for me, definitely would want to address that first, something along those lines.
I would
Beginning with the
rather
room treatment.
I would rather sit in a perfect room with perfect speakers, perfect D to A conversion, um, perfect listening environment with just plugins than a rubbish room with rubbish speakers and all the best analog gear. And I know what result I'll prefer. I much prefer the perfect room with the digital plugins. I know that 100%. So I'd start there. That's the when you move and when you get this room that you've got that's going to be your dedicated room, get that. Priority number one is make that sound the best it can possibly sound. That's where I would be spending the majority of my budget, and then the gear can just go into that room over time. But like a good speakers, good interface, you've already got those. Trinov, that will massively help, and good acoustics, and just generally a really nice room.
Yeah, and from there, thinking really down the line, it sounds like definitely some like a final compressor, mastering compressor.
I'd go with the West Audio Rear. I really would, just based on the fact that you've already got a Hyperion, you've already got a Pandora. The Rear would be a logical one to go for. It's not massively expensive, and you already know that format. The one thing, like, I don't use my 500 series gear in mastering. I use all my 19-inch gear, but there's no reason you can't use the West Audio stuff in mastering.
So I'm actually out of slots now with my
Oh, really?
500 because I have only an 8 channel. I thought 8 would be okay, and I wouldn't really for mastering. Maybe I would want to go
What have
into
you
the
got
big
in there
boys.
currently?
Fredenstein Bento 8.
What modules have you got in there? You got a Hyperion.
I've got the Mog Pre Q4, Hyperion, Pandora, SPL Big. So because I have the
Get rid of the big. Stick a Rear in there instead.
you think I can get the imaging impact with that without
Right, I'll tell you what. Wait, I'll tell you what. Right, when we get off this call, go and compare the plugin to the hardware, and then tell me you can't just use the plugin prior to coming out the box.
Yeah, I have looked at that comparison. Yeah, the plugins seem to hold up pretty well, but yeah,
I know what I would rather. I know what I would rather in that rack.
Yeah, that's a good point. So something to consider. But a question for you would be Rhea versus maybe the just the bus comp, as like would the bus comp be a good mastering comp there?
Which bus comp?
The West Audio one.
This one, the NG, NG bus comp. It's basically the Pandora. You're just doubling up. It's another VCA comp.
Okay.
Pandora and that are going to sound basically the same. One's multi-band, one's not.
Got it. So I'm thinking of like the Rhea, or I really like the idea of the Shadow Hills just for probably the name, but and I like the colors. You
So
know, I like
what Shadow Hills?
the
The dual Van
thickness.
der Graaf or the
Yeah,
big boy?
the dual Vandergraaf. I think down the line would be interested in the big boy, but for now, I
The
think
the dual
yeah.
Van der Graaf is one of the nicest vocal compressors I've ever used. I love it, but it's relatively similar to the what's it called, the grandchild, kind of
Mm,
similar to that. But it's got its own sound. It just sounds, it really does, it does have a great ability to control a track. um I, I I'll be honest with the Shadow Hills dual Van der Graaf, and maybe it's because I've seen the price increase over the period of time. I had the dual Van der Graaf. I paid £1,000 for it new about 10, 12 years ago,
mm.
and now they're like 2,400. So I'm reluctant. I wouldn't personally buy one because I just think that's too much of a price increase. Um,
Yeah,
and I honestly don't think it's worth like 2,400. It's great. Look, don't get me wrong, it's great. But for 2,400, you could spend a little bit more and get yourself the West Audio Tube Comp.
yeah.
If you're thinking about getting a 19-inch um, compressor,
Mm.
and you're thinking about the West Audio Bus Comp, don't get the Bus Comp because you've already got the Pandora. Instead, get the Tube Comp. Spend that little bit more, and the Tube Comp is basically a bigger, better version of the Rhea in many ways.
Okay. And um also you mentioned the zombie wreck Mimit, and I mean that from the demos you've posted and some other videos I've seen, that thing is incredible. Um at what point do you think that would come into the equation, or should come into the equation based on my situation?
Um, the the Mammoth's a special box that's, I think, for its price, it takes some considering on whether to get it, because it does a little, but that's massive, and that makes no sense. But that is what it does. It does such a small thing that, but you can't live without it once you've got it. It's an incredible tool, but it's just like, if you're spending that sort of money, it's like you're talking, oh, do I have a really nice EQ or the Zombie Rex Mammoth? And it's like, you only get the Zombie Rex Mammoth if you've already got the really nice EQ, and you need these kind of special boxes.
Yeah.
The one thing the Mammoth will do is it will give you a sound no one else can achieve. There's nothing else that achieves that. And it's like, anyone you speak to who's got one will tell you it's my secret weapon. And it's one of these tools that you put it on and it's like, wow. If you're doing dance music, it's an essential. Every mastering engineer who's doing dance music should have one, because the difference it makes is massive.
And that makes perfect sense, and I think clears it up for me with the timing. I think I would look at that towards the end once I've
Definitely,
addressed everything else, and
it's
then
like a summing mixer. You know,
yeah,
you
exactly.
don't need it. You don't need the Mammoth. You don't need a summing mixer. But if you've got money to burn and you want to spend something on something that's going to make a nice difference, a summing mixer and a Mammoth will do that. But that's after you've got everything else that you need.
Yeah, and I forgot what I was gonna ask. I lost my train of thought. But yeah, No, that's really helpful. Yeah. So as you're going through, one thing I've the analog chain. One thing I've introduced is some analog hiss,
You will do.
and so how do I avoid that? And like, what sorts of things do you do to
So the best,
keep that at bay?
the thing with it is the best way to avoid that is this is one reason why I don't use 500 series in mastering, and it very much is something that can be introduced in mastering. Is this kind of a lot more surface noise in 500 series? Now it's not necessarily the West Audio units that are doing that. Um, it could be that it's one of the units that's in that chain that's increasing the noise quite considerably. It could be the rack that they're in that could be introducing a lot more noise than normal. You'll find generally, I know myself, the West Audio 500 series modules, they have no abnormal amounts of noise. The Tegla Schwarzkopf machine, that has a lot more, not a lot more, but it has more noise, noticeably more noise than the West Audio gear. Certain gear will have that little bit more surface noise. The best way to avoid that is to get into the analog chain from your digital end, go out of your digital end into the analog chain as loud as possible. So if you're -1 dB off of clipping, fine. You want to be up there as loud as possible. If you go in at, let's say, -10 dB into your analog chain, you're into your analog chain there. Then if you raise the volume with a limiter at the end, you raise all that surface noise with it. So you need to raise that limiter maybe 10 dB. So if you turn it up after the analog chain, you've raised all that surface noise by 10 dB. Whereas if you're 10 dB going right in as loud as you possibly can into that mastering chain, when you go to the end, you've only got to maybe lift it 1 dB or something. So you're raising that surface noise only 1 dB. So it's really go into it as hot as possible, not necessarily hot, but go in as loud as possible. Now, the problem you have when it comes to 500 series is you sometimes, with some units, you don't have as much headroom. I find the West Audio stuff is really good for headroom, but certain 500 series units, they may not have as much headroom. And this may just be a case of, if you was to just remove the SPL big, you might find that all that noise that you're getting is from that one unit. So what I'd recommend doing is working out which unit is actually printing or giving you that noticeable surface noise. Like, I have a good way of doing it with my Flock Audio patch bay. I can just take each unit out of the chain, and if I've got
bypass, is that
no, it's a bypass. Bypass might have a true bypass where it might truly bypass it, but often it won't bypass. Like, it might not be a true bypass. I would take it fully out the chain. Like, if you've got it patched into a patch bay, just take it out. Note how much noise there is. One thing that if you've got Pro Q4 or Pro Q3, just have an instance of that at the end of your chain. Once you're back into the box, monitor that, and then you can turn the gain up on that to 36 dB, and you'll see all the surface noise. And then when you take something out and bypass one of the units, you'll see the surface noise go up and down, and you'll see what piece of gear is adding all that surface noise.
Nice. That's a great piece of advice there. I'll definitely.
It's something I've spent years and years and years working with, reducing the surface noise as much as possible. I've bought gear before that I've loved, and I've put it into the chain, and I've got, oh my god, it sounds incredible, but it's got a ridiculous amount of surface noise. And then you've got to make the decision, right, do I have this unit that sounds really good but prints this into the low end, or has this really loud hiss and noise floor right up the high end? And you've got to kind of decide, And the majority of the time, and this is something I've toyed with many a time, is no, I don't want to add all this unwanted noise to my chain just for this unit. And this again, this is something that kind of goes back to the more modern gear. The more modern gear doesn't have that. You know, all of this gear doesn't have this loud surface noise. If you looked at the surface noise that's in my mastering chain, for instance, in comparison to yours, and you'd say, but I've only got 3 or 4 units in mine, and I've got all this surface noise, and mine's half the surface noise that you've probably got, and I've got maybe 8 units in there. And it's because all of this gear, it's very modern. 500 series gear, for instance, the West Audio stuff here. It's optimized and designed to go in these Titan racks. So it being in those racks, it's optimized for those racks. It's not necessarily optimized for a different rack. So it could be something like your bento rack, for instance, isn't great for the West Audio stuff to go into, but if it was all into a Titan rack, it would all be perfectly fine. And I know this from my own experience. I used to have an API. I think it was an 8B or a 10 slot. No, I think it was an 8 slot API rack, and it was noisy as anything, and it was horrible. And you'd think it's an API rack. It's supposed to be probably one of the best. I mean, it was one of the more expensive ones, but I swapped it for a West Audio rack and was like, whoa, all the noise is gone. And yeah, so that's one thing that's I would recommend at some point.
Yeah, I think the price tag of the Titan for me was it's hard to justify.
That's
I'm perfectly fine with
this is the thing though, is when you consider the rack is what's feeding it all the power, and that's all its performance. It's the most important thing about putting these 500 series modules into. And I understand spending mad amounts of money, and like I think there'd probably be about $1,000 in US for a Titan rack, which is a lot of money for a rack. Like for me to think I've got $5,000 worth of racks, you know, that's a lot of money to just have on racks.
yeah.
But it's almost like, right, okay, I'm going to go and buy 5 West Audio modules that are going to go in a rack. The rack is just a kind of a cost that's factored into the modules as well. It's if anything more important than the modules. Also, as well, with the 500 series Titan racks, is you've got one USB out the back, which then you've got your West Audio units in there.
Yeah, I think that
Gives you another 2 slots as well.
Yeah, 2 more slot. That solves would solve a lot of the bottlenecks I'd run into here. So I think that might be a good next step for me.
I'd say if you're thinking about this, if you're thinking of going, right, well, I might get a West Audio NG bus comp for, let's say, $3,000 or something like that. But for $3,000 you could get a Titan and a rear. I would 100% say go down the route of the Titan and the rear. And then sell the other rack, or keep the other rack, and you've always got room to expand.
Yeah, and so that makes a lot of sense. I'm still like on the fence between the RIA and like spending a little bit more for a really nice final polish mastering compressor, and then also the Golly Porter Grinder demos. Those stand out to me as that EQ is phenomenal, and potentially just the idea of using the Mog and mid side sounds incredible. I think my gut really wants to do that first, but that because it's the sexy blue Mog, but well, yeah, I don't want to take up any more of your time. I could ask questions for if well, great. Thanks again, Paul, and
Oh, my
Yeah,
pleasure.
God bless you.
My pleasure, mate.